and then I'll turn it over to you to introduce the next item, because I think that's through you, behavioral health. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So good morning all. This is a joint behavioral health and legal justice systems meeting. It is currently 11:32. I'm going to call this meeting to order and start with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together, or to bring us together here today, sorry. And please join us in covering such truths at any and all public events. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Hamill to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
And I had my mic off the entire time I just spoke. Jill, you'd think after 2 years of Zoom that we would just all, hands down and know all this stuff. Jill, can you give me the agenda one more time? I just went and scroll down so I can see the entirety of the agenda item. There we go. Okay. All right. So the first item for discussion today, and it's the second item on the agenda, is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, Clubhouse International Model. And then here to take us through today are Alan, is it Friedlob?
Friedlob.
Friedlob. Yes. Okay, sorry about
No
that,
problem.
Alan. And then Ruth Davidson. And the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for having us today to talk about the Clubhouse International Model and bringing it to Whatcom County. My name is Alan Friedlob, and I'm joined by Ruth Davidson. Ruth and I are volunteers serving on a Clubhouse startup planning group that's affiliated with NAMI Whatcom. Beginning in April, NAMI received funding from the Washington State Healthcare Authority to develop this specific model of psychosocial rehabilitation for persons with serious mental health conditions in Whatcom County. In your packet, we've included a background paper on the Clubhouse International Model and a video of an established clubhouse. We'd like to show the video now, if we could. It's about 4 minutes, and describe some key features of the model. And then Ruth will speak to program outcomes related to the model. And then we'd like to engage in about a 10-minute conversation about what you think about the model and how it would address the needs of persons with serious mental illness in Whatcom County. So if we could have the video.
Yes, if you don't hear this video when it starts, someone give me a thumbs up and I'll troubleshoot.
We are the most important mental health facilitator working behind the scenes for over 70 years, and you don't even know our name. Venture House is a community-based nonprofit mental health agency utilizing a unique approach known as the Clubhouse model.
I've been working there for about 23 years now. This is an amazing agency. It's just my life.
You get to work with an individual side by side and you get to see their growth. We serve adults 18 years and older who have been diagnosed with serious mental illness. So schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression.
Members and staff work side by side in the complete operation of the clubhouse.
You don't know who the member is and you don't know who the staff is. We don't wear any, name tags to distinguish that. We are purposely understaffed. So the membership has that sense of feeling needed because they are needed.
and that gives them purpose. It's impossible to run the day-to-day operation without the members. They have members create everything. You feel like you're a part of something really big. You're setting a foundation for future accomplishments. First Clubhouse started in New York City in 1948. And there are now over 300 clubhouses around the world. The clubhouse model is a pendulum swing away from historical ways of managing people who live with mental illness, which was, to institutionalize, marginalize, stigmatize, and actually remove choice. And so the language of Clubhouse is strength-based, person-centered. We recognize that everybody can bring something to the table. And on that, what color, race, what religion, what walk of life you're from, what disability you have, we all accept each other as we are. The unit is devoted to education and employment, communication, intake and data, the kitchen and dining room, housing and maintenance, and members can choose where they want to work.
I was able to get a lot of healing done and a lot of life goals together.
I think it's most about learning about yourself. Venture House helped me to grow, get better, be more of a leader, and helping others. You can socialize, get jobs, go back to school.
It kind of gives you a sense of really being involved, really in a work mode.
Even within the last week, I think we've had 3 members take a job from our job posting, apply, get an interview, and they've become employed in our last week alone. The kitchen is the heartbeat of the clubhouse, and food is always a draw. We have a menu planning committee, and the committee sits down and decides what will be on the menu, and it can come from anybody's idea.
The most important factor of what it is that I do is building those relationships, and those are real relationships.
It makes me feel wanted. When members come into the clubhouse, they feel valuable. They start seeing how their mind starts to restore.
At the end of the day, when you feel like you've done something, it does catapult you into feeling better and gaining your overall health.
We don't focus on a person's diagnosis. We focus on what they are capable of doing.
We have some artists here, singers, we have people that play guitar.
They have given me the confidence to reach goals. There's hope.
I have come such a long way from where I was 2 years ago.
My hope for the clubhouse and clubhouses around the world is that we are as well known as the YMCA, that there's a clubhouse in every community. It is understood to be a key factor in supporting and promoting mental health and wellness for all.
Thank you to Venture House for giving me hope and a lot of strength.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Venture House, for including me in this mission and to repair whatever damage has been lost through mental illness.
Thank you so much for being there for me, accepting me, respecting me, letting me know that I'm human.
I have seen so many people who came into the clubhouse and just going out, like a better person.
The clubhouse is the quintessential example of how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a proven model that works. It works. We're getting it together.
Thanks, Jill. So let me just highlight some observations in the video. The Whatcom Clubhouse is not a drop-in center. A person can walk in, but still has to have a referral from a healthcare or behavioral healthcare provider to become a member. That's been the CHI long established model, and the model has operating standards and an accreditation program. So we are not designing our own model of what a clubhouse should look like. We're replicating the CHI model. As the video emphasized, it's member-focused, strengths-based, and an egalitarian community. It's not a peer-run program in that staffing, there is staffing, but staffing is kept to a minimum. Staff and members are working side by side. And they're working side by side to meet 2 pressing needs: skill building, where work leads to a healthy life, and focused around this concept of a work order day. That's really the core concept of the CHI model, where work within the clubhouse is organized in terms of business units, communications, kitchen dining room, intake data, clubhouse maintenance, and many others. Again, the other psychosocial need that's met is the key one, relationship building, addressing loneliness and the importance of belonging in a space big enough so that you can belong in your own unique way. Another element of the clubhouse that is, I think, very interesting is their employment program, transitional employment, which is a highly structured program where Clubhouse contracts with employers for jobs that it guarantees to fill. The Clubhouse then trains members to do the job and assures that a member or staff fulfills that commitment. These placements are generally part-time and include a lot of support from the Clubhouse staff. When concluding a placement, the member can choose to try another placement or move to supported or independent employment. So one can envision the Whatcom Clubhouse contracting with local businesses to implement a transitional employment program. It also has the element of supported employment. Clubhouse, in a nutshell, provides a safe place to meet people, have friends, contribute to society, and participate in a community life that can come with a job if you want one. A positive identity, having a structured day, enhancing self-esteem, and less interaction with the mental health system, and reduced personal and social stigma are outcomes of the Clubhouse model. So I want to turn it over to Ruth, who is going to talk about project outcomes and program outcomes related to Clubhouse.
Hi, thanks. Should I share the slides on my screen? Nope, got it.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just ask to advance the slide. This is going to be a very quick presentation, and we'll just re-summarize some of the things that have already come up. These slides were taken from a new Clubhouse development training that Alan and I and 4 other people attended in May as part of our responsibilities as the Clubhouse Startup Committee. All in all, we had 75 people from 3 continents on the Zoom call. So it was really exciting to be part of this worldwide initiative to be making more clubhouses also in a local way. You can go ahead, next slide. Just to recap how this all touches personally our lives, mental health conditions are very common, touching every part of our community and every community worldwide. They are more common than cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. And so in the end, mental health conditions will affect all of us on a personal level at some point in our lives, either through our own experience or those of our loved ones. Next slide, please. The serious mental health conditions lead to many negative outcomes. Just for example, suicide. There's 1 suicide about every 90 seconds globally. There's increased rates of incarceration, which I know is a big concern for this group. Loss of independence, isolation. From an economic perspective, 26% of all-time lost disability is due to mental illness. So that has a large impact financially on our society. And also care is inadequate. Though mental illness is 14% of the global disease burden, it is only 4% of the global health budget. And I can attest from my own experience as someone who lives with bipolar disorder and has had to access care in Whatcom County. Our situation is no exception. We do not have adequate service providers to meet the needs up here. Next slide, please. So the Clubhouse International model is one solution to these problems that works hand in hand with other solutions. The first Clubhouse opened in New York City in 1948, like she said in the video. And the Clubhouse International was incorporated as an umbrella organization in 1994. At Clubhouse's members work together to accomplish their goals alongside staff. They help each other access employment, housing, education, healthcare, and social activities. It's extremely cost effective, about $40 per member per day to provide these services. And for example, it leads to a better employment outcome. 42% of Clubhouse members are employed on average versus 15 to 20% of the general population living with serious mental health conditions. Next slide, please. This model provides hope, opportunity, dignity, and a sense of purpose to those living with serious mental health conditions. The model is supported by a proven set of 37 standards governing membership, the work ordered day that Alan in the video have already described, employment functions of the space, and so on. These are the standards used in Clubhouse accreditation and will be the guiding principles behind our development of the Whatcom Clubhouse because they are well proven in the real world. Clubhouses do complement existing mental health services and partner with entities such as employers and housing services in the community. Next slide, please. Clubhouses address basic needs also for a healthy life and end social and economic isolation through access to things like education, housing, and social events. So I have a couple years of experience in mental health advocacy now, and as I mentioned, I live with bipolar disorder. And the thing that I think has resonated the most with me about the Clubhouse model as we've started on this journey is that it does end social isolation because that is something that other types of behavioral health services sadly don't address. And that's a huge burden for those of us living with these conditions, finding a place where we belong, where we're needed. Next slide, please. So we have evidence that the Clubhouse model improves outcomes for hospital stays. It reduces the length and frequency of hospital stays, reduces incarceration rates, improves employment rates, and also reduces overall costs and improve physical and mental well-being for the members. So we're really excited to be getting ready to follow this proven roadmap in Whatcom County, but of course, and also tailoring our endeavors to the needs of the specific community. And so the rest of these slides I left from the training are all references to either public relations materials released by specific clubhouses or scholarly articles talking about some of the outcomes that I've been discussing. And if you'd like more links to, say, scholarly articles after this talk, please let Alan and I know because we have plenty of them. And I'm just going to end it there.
Okay, so we'd like to use the rest of our precious time to ask you, what do you think about Clubhouse as we presented it? And how do you think it can contribute to the objectives and desired vision of the task force for our behavioral health system in Whatcom County?
Thanks, Alan and Ruth. Committee members, Mike Parker.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you more for bringing more services. You know, I know, Ruth, you did a really good job telling us last time that this is not another Rainbow Center. And I think for some of us, we have obviously seen the elimination of that. And that has been a challenge for the community and for folks that are struggling out on the streets, right, with co-occurring disorders. So I appreciate you taking the time to distinguish that and to so that we are really grounded in what you're doing. That being said, even though people miss a Rainbow Center, we're very excited about the Clubhouse model. I know I am personally. I do have one question before I address Alan. So in short, I think it's going to be really helpful because I think it's a place where pro-social connections and the employment connections, these are things that are not currently and commonly available in the environment that you're going to provide them. So those are absolutely critical. And I believe your research, and I've seen other research that shows that it's going to help people stay out of jail. So to kind of get at your question, I would say from this humble person's standpoint, you're going to be hitting some things our community doesn't have. I did have a question for you. I see in your slides discussion of mental illness, no mention of co-occurring disorders, and how are people welcomed that are struggling with co-occurring disorders, and maybe that being the more operant issue for them is a substance use disorder. If you could touch on that.
Right. So the Clubhouse International Model, we are not a 12-step program, and we are also not a healthcare provider. So the way we offer our services is that people are referred in by their healthcare provider or by a social worker, verifying their diagnosis. Our intention with Whatcom Clubhouse is not to exclude based on basis of diagnosis, if that answers your question. So there is a distinction between serious mental health conditions and mental illness in general. And we're aiming to serve the population that is most in need of ending social and economic isolation, for people that are suffering from disability, from life interruption, but there will not be an exclusion based on type of diagnosis. But the importance of us not being a healthcare provider, we won't be providing treatment for addiction services. We would welcome people that suffer from substance abuse disorder.
Thank you. Maya Banyo.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. This is really cool, really exciting. And I'm Chief Deputy Defender. In seeing at mental health court, when I view mental health court, I really see the social isolation and lack of community as an ongoing issue for folks. And I think that this would be a wonderful place. And so thank you for coming to our community. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie Mitchell.
Yes, hi, Alan. Good to see you again.
Hi, Jackie. Good to see you.
Yeah, I think the Clubhouse model has a lot of merit for the possibility of helping reduce stigma and helping people with serious mental illnesses feel more supported. Certainly gives them a place to kind of gather and just kind of engage in activities as they see fit and want to. But I do have a question which relates back to the previous Rainbow Center, which I don't know if anybody here today knows why, but the question is, so the Rainbow was a drop-in center originally, and then at one point it attempted to become a Clubhouse model. And I don't remember what happened with that, or even if I knew what happened with that, why it wasn't a successful change or transformation. And I just wondered if anybody here today knew the reason for that.
I have to say, I certainly don't, because the Rainbow House was before my time in Bellingham, so I can't speak to that.
Anyone else got an answer? Stephen, were you responding to that? No, okay.
I can get information maybe from the ASO on that, the Administrative Services Organization.
Okay. Moving along, Arlene Feld.
The fact that the program addresses social needs is absolutely vital and really missing from so many of the programs that we have. And whenever there is a program, the things that I am always curious about are, how are they funded? And what's the leadership behind this movement? Is it NAMI or is it some other organization? And the other thing that I think is equally important is the quality of staff. And how do they get trained? And what qualifications do they have? Because those elements will affect the quality of the program.
Okay, so we'll be seeking 501c3 status of our own very soon. We're actually in the process of working on the legal documents, but right now we are operating under the auspices of NAMI Whatcom as an advisory committee only. When we attain our independent 501c3 status, then we'll be governed by a board of directors. And I'll get to the staffing in a minute, but we currently are executing a contract with the Healthcare Authority of Washington State, along with several other Clubhouse startup groups. This is part of a big project Washington State had. So we're working with a budget of about $200,000 for the fiscal year. As far as staffing goes, our plan is to hire an executive director after we attain our nonprofit status. And then that person will become the face of the Clubhouse and start to work on projects along with the advisory committee, such as fundraising. The Clubhouse has encouraged us to pursue multiple income streams. So we will not remain solely reliant on the healthcare authority contract. We will be actively seeking to obtain public and private grants and fundraise in the community with both individuals and businesses as our donors. And then going forward with the staffing, after we get through the phase where we have our executive director and acquire a location, then we will be hiring generalist staff that work alongside with the members to ensure the day-to-day functioning of the clubhouse. And as far as identifying quality staff, we went over a lot of that in our cool clubhouse training that I told you about. And basically being able to work well with other people and have excellent relationships with other people, build consensus, hold people accountable. Those are the sorts of things we look at for in clubhouse generalist staff. We can actually draw people from a wide variety of backgrounds. Alan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth, and thanks for your answer. I think the only thing I would add to it is building relationships with our behavioral health agencies. Clubhouse as a day support service is reimbursed by Medicaid. And so Medicaid for many clubhouses represents a sustainable income stream. That said, it requires the clubhouse to have either some memorandum of understanding with a behavioral health facility, behavioral health organization, or hire staff that have the competencies and credentials to be able to bill Medicaid. So Medicaid is clearly a resource for the clubhouse. When Medicaid comes online is a question. However, it's clearly a source that's used by clubhouses. Nationally, 80% of clubhouses are also under an auspice agency, so they actually are a component of a behavioral health agency. Another source of revenue, potential revenue, is vocational rehabilitation services. So those are probably the two most prominent public sources of dollars.
Stephen Gockley.
Thanks, Dan. Alan, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Stephen.
Yeah. Ruth, thank you for your presentation. It's pretty clear the value as a supplement to the mental health treatment system that a clubhouse program would provide. I'm not quite sure because part of Alan's question was, what do we think the fit is with the incarceration task force goals? And so raises a cluster of questions for me. What kind of capacity are you envisioning? And I understand you're not a treatment provider, so I'm assuming that one of the criteria is involvement in treatment as well. So I'm wondering how that plays out. And lastly, a lot of, so as you both know, I think from past meetings, capacity in those treatment systems is a pretty critical bottleneck in the local environment. And lastly, is a lot of our focus is on people who are also experiencing homelessness. And I'm wondering how that impacts admission in the program. It seems to me that you're not restricting admission by diagnosis, but I'm wondering what other criteria are at play there in bringing people into the program.
So the criteria that to follow the Clubhouse International model we must absolutely adhere to is that they referred by a healthcare provider. So this doesn't preclude the involvement of people experiencing homelessness, although I think we all have to acknowledge that people experiencing homelessness are less likely to be receiving treatment. The receiving treatment requirement per se, I don't think that's the right language. You need to know a healthcare provider. You need to know someone that refers to you. But that said, we don't have anything in our standards that dictates the nature and frequency of treatment that our members are receiving. Our place is to simply work with them in a self-directed way towards what they want to accomplish and what they want to contribute to the clubhouse. As far as capacity goes, that's going to be, we're going to have to start small and then increase. The rule of thumb is about 100 square foot per member. And the attendance ratios that we've seen in the other clubhouses in the Puget Sound area that we've been talking to is about 20% of the members show up on a given day. So if you have like 37 members, you might get 8 average on a given day. I think that was the feature for the Everett Clubhouse. So if we want to, basically our capacity is going to be limited at first because our initial space is probably going to be smaller than what our vision is for our space 5 to 10 years from now. So in order to have members come and cooperate, we need to have a physical clubhouse, but then to grow the clubhouse, you know, we'll need to fundraise. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that provides a lot of information. Thank you, Ruth.
Sheriff Alpo.
Yes, thank you for your presentation and your good work. I just have a question. At the Sheriff's Office, I know other law enforcement agencies are considering, but we have in place a mental health deputy program. And the goal of that program is to divert people with serious forms of mental illness from the criminal justice system after they commit crimes or they're accused of committing crimes to the service providers who are appropriate in the community. So would this be like a pre-court diversion? I mean, could we refer people directly if they had a diagnosis to the clubhouse, or is this something they would have to enter the criminal justice system, have some assessment by the courts, and be referred there? There's a statute in RCW Chapter 10 that allows law enforcement to divert people in appropriate circumstances to treatment without charging them with crime. So any perspective you have on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Ruth?
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Could I comment on that?
Yeah.
I think the relationship between a clubhouse and the criminal justice system is something that we really need to explore more, Sheriff Elfo, because there is this direct link between a person and their healthcare or behavioral healthcare provider in terms of referral, at least as it's set up. So it really begs the question of exploring a referral. Concept of referral is different in the context of a pre-court diversion. And maybe we need to just, as we get down the pike, kind of explore that together as to what that means. I mean, that may be associated also with the mental health court connection. If there isn't a clear provider identified who can essentially help make that referral happen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Before I call on Jackie and Raylene, since we're kind of in the flow regarding this, I spent part of the morning at the wellness court, which is what we call, which is our mental health court at municipal court. And boy, it was such a reminder as to when people are supported, how well they can do and how they can be successful. There was a graduation today. It was a person who had been what is called an all-star the entire time he was in the program. And all of us lined up, the new police chief and 4 or 5 of her officers, as well as Judge Lev and others. We lined the aisleway that goes to the front of the court, and he walked down as we cheered him on. And to hear some of the stories was quite compelling. So I would, to your question, Alan, how does this work and play with the work that we do here, the recommendations that we make? I would like to see that there's some level of participation with the clubhouse and the wellness court. I think that Robin Willens is on this call. She's a person who's very instrumental in the success of the person today. And there might be an opportunity to collaborate, get out of our silos to some degree, and really help people be successful. Jackie Mitchell.
Thanks, Dan. I was just thinking that in response to Sheriff Alpha's comment that there soon will be behavioral health care providers corresponding with law enforcement, sheriff's deputies out in the field. And then there is currently the behavioral health and reentry services in the jail. So if you're thinking about people in the jail, I think there is a way to connect with healthcare providers. I'm assuming you're including behavioral health care providers when you say healthcare provider referral.
Oh yeah.
Cool. And then go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say too, like to speak to what Alan was just saying in response to the criminal justice diversion, it would really be great to explore different referral frameworks because we can go back to Clubhouse International and ask more questions too. But if we had like multiple types of referral pipelines, as long as the diagnoses are being verified, I think we could come up with a lot of interesting ways to collaborate.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Yeah, and I know that our program in the jail for behavioral health would be happy to have yet another place to refer people and engage them. They can do some warm handoffs. Some of the programs surrounding re-entry in the jail can do some warm handoffs. And then I had a question, which was I'm kind of assuming that there was and maybe you mentioned this and I just didn't hear it, but maybe there was a market survey that you did to gauge interest in the Clubhouse model. Has something like that been undertaken?
Not to my knowledge in Whatcom County. This was kind of came to us through the grapevine. Dina, Autumn, and Alan have been working together on a serious mental illness coalition. So he probably knows the exact story a little better than me, but yeah, it was just came to us through our network that Washington State Healthcare Authority had this contract to execute, and they just needed partners to do it.
Oh, okay, cool. It'd be interesting to know how many people are interested in the model too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing some outreach. We've talked with CMAR and Lifeline Connections and Unity Care and Compass so far. And I think the response that we've gotten is quite positive. And we'll be pursuing those connections and developing those relationships.
Raylene?
Thank you. And before I go, I saw Eric Ritchie put his hand up. I don't know if he was looking for a question. I'll let Eric go first and then I can go.
Thanks. Yeah, so I heard a little bit about the criteria, and I'm wondering about crimes and criminal convictions and for eligibility, of course, and possibly losing eligibility if they commit a crime while in the program. I'm just wondering what y'all think about that.
As far as incarceration history is something that we can ask for on the member intake forms. And many clubhouses do ask for, but that is only used to track outcomes and report, especially in the context of Medicaid funding. We are not, there's no criteria relating incarceration history for membership. That's not one of the 37 standards. That's, I think generally, while I can speak to at this point as far as what happens while they're in the program, the clubhouse, we're concerned with what happens within our doors. Members need to, treat each other with respect and, basically not ruin the experience of anyone else in the clubhouse. But there's no specific expulsion criteria. You want to add anything to that, Alan?
Well, I think the important thing to make on the inclusion criteria is that once you are a member and once you choose to be a member, you're always a member. So if you experience a recurring hospitalization, for example, the clubhouse has a reach out program. They're constantly in contact. Members are constantly in contact with other members, and a member can always return. I think what Ruth said was very accurate. Sometimes when a clubhouse asks for incarceration history, or the history may be not current, it may not be valid in terms of predicting current behavior. So it creates this certain potential bias. So many clubhouses are more concerned with the members showing up for a tour, meeting other members and deciding whether to become a member, and also that referral from the provider that would attest to the potential member not being a current threat to himself or to any other member in the clubhouse. And that's the basic criteria. So as we go through this journey, we're really working on and want to work with you and other behavioral health providers around what our referral form looks like, what our membership forms look like, and what we ask for, what kind of information we ask for.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to also voice my support. Looks like a fantastic program.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand go up there, Eric. I work at a hotel and we have an event today and people are coming and asking me questions, so I apologize. One comment real quick before I go to Raylene. I think that has to get worked out. We need to really unravel this when it comes to, I see the potential for success for people who are in a supportive environment at the clubhouse who may have a, involvement with the justice system. So I think that needs to get unraveled. We have other programs that are not really related to the clubhouse, but we have criteria for pretrial release and things like that, electronic home monitoring. So that might be a good place to start, or at least to get some information. Raylene.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan and Ruth. I appreciate the presentation. I have two separate questions. I really like the idea of this as a preventative model to keep people out of the criminal justice system, knowing that that's not always an option. But I know that if children qualify for an IEP, when the normal graduation would be that the school will assist them through, I can't remember if it's 21 or 26, but they age out at some point, and there's still mental health issues. Can the school actually refer people to a clubhouse once they age out of the system and they still have behavioral health and needs for socialization and skills? That's my first question. My second is completely unrelated to that, and it has to do with transportation for individuals that would qualify but live in rural communities and wouldn't normally be able to get to certain locations. Do you have options for that? Thank you.
I'm going to take the second question first because it's easier. A lot of clubhouses do develop their own transportation programs. So that would be, I think, a pretty obvious choice for Whatcom County because there's going to be a lot of people we want to serve that aren't on a bus line. As far as the school referral thing, I think that's another, I'm really glad for that question because I think it's another avenue to explore for potential pipelines of referral that aren't just a doctor's office. So yeah, similar to how we responded to the question about the law enforcement referral, I think that'd be a great, when we're in the referral phase and trying to acquire members, that'd be a great thing for us to reach out to you about. We can make sure we set up a framework for that.
Thank you so much.
Before I call on Brian, just real quick, I don't see Chris Cochran on the call today. He's the mental health director for the Bellingham School District, and he is on the Behavioral Health Committee. It might be helpful if Jill could forward his contact information to both of you to make that connection. And Brian Estes, you bet. Brian Estes?
Yeah, thank you. I was originally going to ask a question about referral, and that we've had a pretty good discussion of that. And I will only just say I'm the board president of NAMI Whatcom, and right now we are contracting with the HCA and receiving funds from them and passing it on to the group that Alan and Ruth are with. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Brian. Any other questions or comments for Ruth or Alan? Mike Parker.
I wanted to wait, make sure, since this is my second dip here. So thank you again. I've been listening to all the answers. You've mentioned Medicaid. You mentioned maybe connecting your nonprofit that you're going to create to an agency, probably that bills Medicaid. I'm also curious, you mentioned the word supported employment and obviously through foundational community supports here in Washington State, that's reimbursable work. I'm curious, we have some supported employment vendors, if you will, right? In I think like Whatcom Center is doing that work, Opportunity Council is doing that work. Could you just touch on how you might collaborate with other folks kind of doing that work and what that might look like?
I think that gets back to the question of the state of the project. That's an area of that's a real area for needs assessment that we haven't really done yet, to be quite honest with you. And so the intent is definitely not to duplicate services. That's not the intent. The question is, I think, that we've been thinking about is how have those needs been met? Is there essentially a greater demand for those services than the ability to meet them by the agencies? And I think that's a key question. So if a person came to the Clubhouse and wasn't receiving supported employment and wanted it, would we coordinate with the existing programs, or would we provide it ourselves? That type of question. And I think that needs to really be discussed. But I really appreciate the perspective that you've shared, because it's definitely something that it's good advice for us to when we explore this. Yeah.
My hunch is, Alan and Ruth, when you dig around, you're going to find that there's still unmet need, even with all the providers here. And there may be some unique pieces to your model that some of the other providers might be particularly interested in. And I was thinking about the relationships you intend to establish with employers and the efficacy of some of the stats you shared are really incredible. So very excited about that. I think there's plenty of room in that house. I have one other question. This is really kind of on racial equity. So the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force, you can hear it with our land acknowledgement. We also were an early adopter of the GARE Racial Equity Toolkit, and we're pretty noisy with Whatcom County. And I'd like to think that we helped them see that this was a really important piece. Could you just touch on Clubhouse International as a model in terms of like in how it has stood up to questions under scrutiny under racial equity? How does it further movement towards better equity and recognition and removing oppressive states for folks?
Ruth, is it okay if I comment? Or
yes?
Okay, so when we made a visit to the Bellevue Clubhouse, we learned that the sort of mothership of all Clubhouse International models, which is Fountain House, has developed and is working on a national effort to look at racial equity within clubhouses, racial and social equity within clubhouses. And so I think that, and I think in our training that was touched on as well, that I would say that's really in its beginning phases, if I could observe. It is something that is, I mean, I really can't speak for Clubhouse International, so it's hard to comment on that. They are aware of it. They are working on it. They're trying to engage their accredited clubhouses in the effort. Yeah, that's about all I can say. That there's a recognition.
I think every part of our society and every institution in our society still has a lot of work to do in terms of racial equity and inclusion. And I actually would appreciate if you could share some information about this GARE program. It's like where we're at, one of the things we're working on is what our board's gonna look like and how to recruit board members that really represent all the groups in Whatcom County. What we need, any nonprofit board needs, we need to look for people with like certain skills. It's good to include some people that have great community connections for fundraising, but there's other concerns for what the board's gonna look like too. Like I said, I'm interested in this GARE program, and if there's existing initiatives for racial justice and equity in Whatcom County, it would be nice to get involved with that while we're still getting up and running.
And Heather Flaherty, who's on our call, might have some more comments. And just one last piece, if you want to leave us with ways that we can support you, or if you want to reach out to us after this presentation. I think that whether that be the task force themselves or the individual roles we have, we'd like to be supportive as you all stand this up. And that's my last comment. Thank you both.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mike.
I saw Courtney's hand go up before Perry. Courtney, did you want to comment?
Oh, I was just going to say welcome. I, for a short time, worked at Independence Center, a clubhouse in St. Louis. So it's nice to see another clubhouse getting up here in Washington. I'm excited for y'all.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thanks, Courtney. Go ahead, Perry.
Thanks, Ruth and Alan. I really appreciate the additional information. I've gotten to talk a little bit with Alan and Brian both, just in this regard. One of the thoughts that struck me as folks were talking about sort of connections and resources within the community. I think the response systems division, a new division within the health department that many folks are aware of, but it contains the GRACE and LEAD groups, also mental health court, and other aspects and components, and as well as some pretty close involvement with many of the behavioral health providers in the community. And so a great place to, to access resources and support and discussions, very much oriented towards collaboration. So as this, process develops, certainly there's roundtables and meetings that are there. And I think that it would be a great, linkage. So I wanted to make reference to that. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right. We're at 12:22. We've got a few other items. My tendency is to if there's conversation and questions, just let it go. Just, do it. This is such a great presentation, such a good and welcome asset for our community, for people who really need it. And I think the effects are going to go throughout the community. So like Mike said, if there are things that we can do to support, let us know. And I think we'd be happy to do that. I see a good connection here. So I wanted to thank the presenters, Ruth and Alan, for your taking time today, and everyone on both committees.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, definitely. It's our pleasure to have you. Thanks for committee members for your questions. And I think we'll go on to our next item.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Jill, if I can get the agenda back up.
Dan, I can go ahead and introduce. I think we've got Eric Ritchie.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we've got Eric Ritchie and Maya Vanyo for mental health sentencing alternatives. Are you guys available to proceed?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying that Maya has graciously planned this presentation and will perform super as handling it. And I'm going to just step aside while she just presents away. So if you have any questions for me, I might add some things later, but go Maya, go.
Thanks, Eric. I don't have a cool video or even a PowerPoint for you. Sorry, I'll just be talking to you today. So I'll start by explaining that our legislature has created several sentencing alternatives. The MHSA, we kind of call it in my office MHOSA, mental health sentencing alternative, in addition to the already existent drug offender sentencing alternative, or DOSA, parenting offender sentencing alternative, or POSA, and SOSA, which is the special sex offender sentencing alternative. They're all structured very differently, but all generally allow for treatment in lieu of incarceration. The MHOSA is relatively new. It's less than a year old, although it went into effect in July of 2021. It's available to all individuals who are sentenced after that date, so that it's not the date of offense that controls. So even old cases could go into the program as long as they're sentenced after that date. In a MHOSA, the standard range sentence is suspended, and instead treatment and DOC supervision are required. The court or a defendant or the state any one of those parties can move for the mental health sentencing alternative, but it's contingent on the individual's agreement to participate, which of course makes sense. The court has considerable discretion in deciding whether to impose that sentence, and will weigh whether the individual and the community could benefit from the use of the alternative. They also have to consider the victim's opinion in determining whether the MHOSA is appropriate. So sort of the nuts and bolts of it, some sort of bigger picture stuff. The sentencing guidelines that govern in our state set out sentencing ranges for each crime, and the ranges increase based on an individual's offender score. An offender score is typically calculated by looking at their criminal history. So the length of time where that someone will be supervised in a MHOSA is dependent on what the mid-range of their standard range would be. I'll give an example. Hopefully this will illustrate it. So say someone's charged with robbery in the 2nd degree, and they come in with a 3-point offender score based on their criminal history. Their sentencing range would be 13 to 17 months, a mid-range of 15 months, and that would require 12 to 24 months of community custody on a MHOSA. Now, if that same person had instead 6 points of criminal history because they had more prior convictions, their sentencing range is pretty dramatically increased to 33 to 43 months. And at a mid-range of 38 months, they now look at up to 36 months of community custody. So the maximum supervision is 3 years, 36 months. The minimum is 12 months of supervision. The judge will make a decision of exactly how much should be applied, and that will be determined in part on their criminal history and offender score. So somebody will, that means that the person's entire sentence can be suspended and held over them for their compliance during that period of community custody. In order to be eligible, the judge has to make certain findings. The judge has to make a determination that the person has a serious mental illness at the time of sentencing. And serious mental illness is defined in the statute. It means a mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder. So not just axis 1, not just psychosis or schizophrenia, it can be PTSD, severe depression. So it's a fairly broad set of mental illness issues that can be qualified. However, that disorder, whether it be mental, behavioral, or emotional, must result in serious functional impairment, which substantially interferes with or limits one or more major life activities. So that determination, like whether or someone's mental illness is having that level of functional impairment, that whether it's substantially interfering with someone's life activities, is something that would be determined probably in their psychiatric evaluation or in their or demonstrated in their records. Another caveat to being eligible is that the crime of conviction has to be a felony offense, but it cannot be a serious violent or sex offense. That's pretty generous. In fact, way more generous than other sentencing alternatives, because for instance, for a DOSA or drug offender sentencing alternative, you can't have had a violent conviction within 10 years. So if someone had an assault 2 conviction 9 years ago, they are not eligible for a drug offender sentencing alternative, but they would be eligible for a mental health sentencing alternative. So it's broader, and there are no statutory prohibitions on prior conviction history. Like if they did have a prior sex conviction, they could even get a MHOSA. The current offense just can't be serious, violent, or sex. The judge has to decide that the community and the individual would benefit from supervision and treatment. I can't imagine a case where that wouldn't be true. And finally, the individual has to be willing to participate in the sentencing alternative. And, sometimes we find that people with mental illness who we want to offer a mental health court opportunity to, or some other alternative, they just aren't able to identify their own mental illness and just aren't in a place where they're willing to comply with the requirements of a program like that. And that then in this instance, it wouldn't be available to them. so there are some hurdles, and I'm going to kind of identify them as I go through what's required for what the judge needs in order to make these decisions. So in order to determine whether the individual has a serious mental illness, the court can consider old records. They can look at evaluations for competency, evaluations for involuntary commitment, so old records that we can collect, or other just treatment records from the community if our client will sign a release. But sometimes there isn't sufficient information like that. And then the court is permitted to order an examination of the individual. We have yet to see our court order a MHOSA psychiatric evaluation. We're not really totally sure how that will happen. The court can order competency evaluations, and we may try to use the competency evaluation orders to get MHOSA evaluations, but we haven't attempted it yet. I'm not sure, one, if a court would agree to do that, or two, if the department would accept that responsibility. They may come back and try to quash the order, arguing that they're not responsible for doing MHOSA evaluations. This program, the law for MHOSA was, I would say that stakeholders who are touched by this were not part of the drafting process. And so there's a lot of gaps that we're discovering that weren't contemplated by the drafters, I think. One issue is that Lifeline Connections, that's the agency that contracts with the jail to provide mental health services and reentry services. They do not provide psychiatric evaluations. They only do mental health assessments to determine current treatment needs, you know, because they're working for the jail to try to provide services to folks that are in there. And that's a big gap. It would be great if there was funding or some kind of contract for Lifeline or another agency to do those within the jail. So that's one problem, and I'll kind of end up touching on that again later. The other thing that can happen to help the court determine whether a mental health sentencing alternative is appropriate is for the court to order a pre-sentence investigation by the Department of Corrections. And the statute sets out very specific content that the PSI, which is the pre-sentence investigation, has to contain, but doesn't really give Department of Corrections the tools to collect or create the treatment plans that are required. So for instance, the PSI has to contain a proposed treatment plan for the defendant's mental illness. The treatment plan must include the name and address of the treatment provider that's agreed to provide treatment to the defendant, including an intake evaluation, a psychiatric evaluation, and development of an individualized plan of treatment. Well, fine, who is this? Where are we gonna get the services, and who's gonna coordinate all of that? Our recent survey in our office, just calls made by our behavioral health specialists, show that Unity Care currently requires a primary care physician for a referral, has a 6-month wait for services. Lake Whatcom and Compass have halted referrals. CMAR is 6 to 8 weeks out. We've received no response from Sunrise to various calls. We went by the other day, their doors were locked. I assume that means they're not accepting folks. And we've gotten conflicting information from Lifeline about whether they're accepting outpatient folks at this time. So how and who creates a treatment plan and with whom is a huge question. Additionally, whoever that treatment provider is has to agree to reporting requirements to the Department of Corrections. I think generally our local providers are willing and able to meet those reporting requirements, but they are very specific. DOC also has to do some more things that are more standard for them, like proposing a monitoring plan and checking on the living conditions. They recommend crime-related prohibitions and affirmative conditions, and require that the person involved sign a release that will allow the department to confirm components of treatment and a monitoring plan. So DOC can write this report, but they have no means to gather the materials to write the report. And so at this point, my office has generally taken on that role for our clients, trying to get all this information. But once we've done all that work, like if we are actually successful in getting someone a psychiatric evaluation and setting up a treatment plan and gathering all of that, well, we're reluctant to ask for a pre-sentence investigation because we prefer to just get it in front of the judge and get those services going and the person out of jail rather than wait another 60 days for a pre-sentence investigation that's really just going to reiterate all the work that we've already done. So I think that the PSI is a possible tool, but it has yet to be effective or helpful for as far as we see it. If we are eventually successful in getting someone on a mental health sentencing alternative, then the court monitors the supervision. There are periodic reviews scheduled. The person is monitored to make sure that they follow the treatment plan, take medications as prescribed, refrain from using drugs and alcohol, and whatever other requirements the judge has imposed. If there is a treatment issue that arises during the supervision, then DOC and the treatment provider are to work collaboratively and jointly determine an intervention that's appropriate for a violation of a treatment condition. But if the person violates in a way that involves their decompensation related to psychosis, or if they present a risk to the community or an individual, then DOC can violate them independently. If they're successful, then ultimately they serve out their community custody and the case is over, but they do have a conviction on their record. It's not a deferred disposition or anything like that. The person will have that criminal conviction on their record. If they're not successful, then the court, if they fail to meet requirements of their treatment program or perhaps commit another crime or something like that, then the court would set a termination hearing and decide if the person should be terminated. And if they are, then they are sentenced to a standard range sentence, and they do receive some credit. They receive credit for the time that they were supervised in the community. So that's the nuts and bolts of the program. But and it could really be an incredible tool for treatment in lieu of incarceration, but our community has to have treatment providers in order for it to be utilized. And that means we need funding for and providers to complete psychiatric evaluations and the follow-up treatment. So that's the MAHOSA in a nutshell. And Eric and I can answer any questions folks have about it.
So I think before I move to questions, I just want to give a real life story about how it went one time. In fact, I think I had a case that was the first time where we heard this issue in front of a judge in Whatcom County. I had just convicted a man of manslaughter in the second degree, and I think some of you have probably heard about the case. It was where a baby was not fed adequately by a couple, and both of them were convicted of manslaughter second. The woman was convicted at plea, and the man went to trial. And after trial, we were preparing for sentence, and the defendant brought up the idea of a mental health sentencing alternative. The judge and I had never heard of it. In fact, the defense attorney had never heard of it as something that had just passed and was available to this defendant. He brought it to our attention and asked for it. He was then given time to go out and get an evaluation, and he did. He went before some people to get a mental health evaluation that probably wasn't sufficient for the program. First off, I'll tell you, manslaughter second is an eligible offense. Yeah, the death of a baby, causing the death of a baby by negligence is an eligible offense for this alternative. Does manslaughter one? No. In fact, the only ones that really are not eligible are murder, manslaughter first, assault first, kidnap one, sex offenses, and robbery one. But the rest, generally the rest of the crimes out there are eligible for this type of sentencing alternative. So he was eligible. He was sent out to get another evaluation, and he did, and he came back with something. The Department of Corrections heard about it. They didn't like it. They, at the time when we addressed the court about him receiving this alternative, the Department of Corrections spoke up and objected to it. The victim spoke up and objected to it too. As you imagine, she might. She had just been sentenced, and she had done her prison time, and she thought it was fair that the person who was involved in this also did his prison time, and I objected to it. And And at the end of the day, the court denied it. It's really hard to say exactly why, but the court denied this alternative for this individual. And I'll just also tell you that he had said that the reason why the child died was because he was suffering from depression. And, there may have been some of that, some truth to that too. But even so, the court denied this alternative. Right, I'll stop.
My reflections on what Eric just described is that I think DOC's understanding of their role has changed since then. I mean, this really is new, but in my conversations with DOC community custody officers, both at our local level, but also at the state level, they've made it clear that in pre-sentence investigation reports, Department of Corrections is not to render an opinion about whether the person should get the sentencing alternative or not. It's very different than a SOSA, in which they are asked to render an opinion, and that this report is really limited to the criteria set out in the statute, and there isn't a risk assessment. There isn't. They're not supposed to opine as they did in the case that Eric is describing. So I think that was a misunderstanding of their role, and we've I think clarified that at this point. But the victim's input is absolutely to be considered, and so that I think was correct. And I'm not second guessing this particular situation, but DOC's role is different.
Thank you, Eric and Maya. I'm assuming this is open for questions at this point. The one question I have is, budget sessions are coming up. Is there something that we can recommend to the task force to assist in this? Is there something that we can work with Lifeline Connections to see if we can modify the current contract to add that, if there's even staffing available? Because I know treatment providers are an issue right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think funding to conduct psychiatric evaluations, and I don't know if Lifeline would be in a position to provide a contract for that. I don't know that they have someone qualified to do that level. I think they've got the Art, and I'm blanking on his last name, is not a doctor who goes in to do these mental health evaluations in the jail. I don't know, but it is a gap. It's like an unfunded mandate in the statute. It's something that's required for the court, and the court can order it, but there's no one to do it. And, for some folks, we've been pulling from our professional services budget because we want our clients to have access to this. It's not sustainable. Our professional services budget doesn't contemplate psychiatric evaluations for everyone that wants a mental health sentencing alternative. So it is it's a financial gap. Thanks, Raylene.
Thank you, Maya. Jackie?
Yeah, so I know who you're talking about, Art. And by the way, the behavioral health program is contracted through county health, not through the jail. But Art is, I believe, an ARNP, if I recall. So he is a prescriber, but I think the issue is one of two things, probably both things. One is probably capacity. Again, there's still a workforce issue out there, that huge gaps and difficulty finding people, and especially prescribers. Prescribers are at the top of the list of folks that we have trouble contracting with or finding to provide services. And then the second issue is that, if I recall, these are people who are essentially going to go into treatment to avoid a prison sentence. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And so to me, that says there's a higher level of criminogenesis overall for these people than just the typical jail population. And so
why I don't understand that analysis.
So a lot of people with a higher level of criminogenesis are they may have also axis 1 type disorders, but there's a huge part of what's going on with them that is not necessarily treatable and may call for specialized services. And some of our providers don't have those specialized services. There are things like, what's it called? I have to think of the name of them. There used to be one called moral recognition therapy, but it wasn't really a best practice, but it was widely used. There's another one for, what is it called? It was for borderline personality disorder, and I can't remember what it's called. Oh, DBT. Yeah, DBT. So there's specialized practices that some of these agencies may or may not have, especially currently. And when they have already full wait lists, I'm sure you're having trouble finding people with the specialized, both with specialized abilities and with that have the time and space on their caseload. So, but what I was wondering was, did this mental health sentencing alternative come with additional funds for treatment?
No, no funds.
So is it an unfunded mandate then, essentially? I see. Okay, thank you.
Oh, it's just, yeah, it's super frustrating that we uncover these bottlenecks within the system, and people need these things and we can't provide them. Dialectical behavioral therapy, by the way, is used, I know, with victims of crime, specifically with Bridget Collins Family Support Center. I know that they use that in some capacity there. My question is more into the funding side of things. So when we say unfunded mandate, are we talking about state dollars? Are we talking about the Medicaid reimbursement that is not adequate? Where's the bottleneck here?
Well, there's a couple problems. I mean, one is that, so say we get someone who's got a diagnosis that's appropriate, and but they don't have insurance because they're in jail, and they can't, so none of our treatment providers will come into the jail and work with them to transition them out into treatment. The only option is the PACT program. PACT program is the only program which will go into the jail, do an evaluation, agree to treat someone, and they kind of band-aid it, or just are like, well, we know they're going to get insurance once they're released, so we'll agree to accept them, and we'll just kind of work with that and eat it and understand that we'll get our money eventually. But no other program, not like Whatcom, not Unity Care, not CMAR, nobody else will do that. So if the person, but to be PACT qualified, PACT is like a very limited program. They have a very limited number of folks they can admit every month. I think it's 4. They require only very specific diagnoses. And there are folks that are eligible for this mental health sentencing alternative, absolutely, under the statute, but don't meet the qualifications for PACT. And if they're incarcerated, there is no other way. There's no other program for them.
I think Raylene left her seat, so I just want to follow up real quick. When you, sorry about that. When you say PACT, that's Program for Assertive Community Treatment, is that correct?
I don't know what it stands for, but it is run by Lifeline Connections, and that sure sounds right.
Okay, and then my question is, when you say that they're not insured, the person while they're in custody, you're referring to Medicaid, is that correct?
Apple Care, sure, yes.
I think it's
I wish Courtney was here because she would be able to tell you this, but. Okay.
So some of these, sorry, I'm just gonna go off here for just a second. So some of these things are just, they require advocacy at a level that we're just not at. So I had Congressman Larson right over there on that couch talking with him about Medicaid reimbursement. My understanding was that that they're temporarily, and this might have been a COVID thing, that it went up to 85% reimbursement, but typically it was 50%. And there probably are far smarter people on this call that would be more knowledgeable. But I think that as part of our task force strategy, I think that we need to think about at what levels we're advocating at, because we're technically only to provide recommendations to Whatcom County Council. And then sometimes the executive, I thought I saw Tyler Schroeder on the call here earlier, that sometimes they get involved and have opinions. But I really think that we should look at our task force charter and see if we have the flexibility to provide recommendations at different levels. I'm not saying it's going to be effective, but it's frustrating when we keep hitting these ceilings and there's not a lot we can do at this level. So I just want to throw that out there to maybe see if our staff support folks can chime in maybe at the next meeting and let us know what our limitations are. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Jackie?
So I guess I'm kind of following on what Dan said. It just seems to me like communities should push back on this kind of thing because you need the resources to be able to do the work, and not sending down any resources and expecting us to do more, communities to do more and provide services to an even more challenging population without the resources is just unrealistic, just plain unrealistic. I mean, we can't even do the job that we have to do now without this population. So more services are needed, more funding is needed to provide those services. I see Tyler's hand up.
Thank you. Tyler?
Yeah, hi everybody. I was wanting to join in just a little bit to build off of what Jackie had to say and ask a couple of questions. So we kind of recognize that the psychiatric evaluation is a part that would need some additional funding to allow for this type of sentencing alternative to move forward. But then isn't there also the supervision requirements? Or I guess my question would be is who would have that responsibility of the supervision requirements for that individual for the duration of time that Maya was talking about earlier?
Yeah, so, I mean, Department of Corrections is tasked with supervising and collecting information to provide to the court about compliance. But the statute says that the reporting agency, or excuse me, the treatment agency, one moment. Okay, so the treatment provider has to monitor the progress of the defendant on the sentencing alternative and notify the department and the court at any time during the duration of the term of the alternative if the defendant fails to produce substantial compliance with court-ordered treatment conditions. So it's sort of a shared responsibility. The treatment provider has to be willing to provide like probably weekly or at least monthly reports to DOC to demonstrate medication compliance and appointment compliance. And so it really is a collaborative thing, I think, between Department of Corrections and the treatment provider.
But it sounds like you would probably be trying to find a treatment provider that could accomplish the evaluations during the process and as the court is making that decision, and then also do the long-term or ongoing supervision associated with it.
Ideally, I think so. Although, I mean, it's like anyone eligible could do the evaluation to determine their diagnosis, to determine what kind of treatment is necessary. And then the individual could, it would be ideally the individual could select from our community providers. I like CMAR. I've already used Unity Care. I have a provider at Lake Whatcom, and like go to any one of those that they already maybe have a relationship with to follow through.
Almost have a list of companies that can, or treatment providers that can provide that and be able to connect the dots there. And then, to build off of what Jackie's kind of indicating is a lot of scenarios, right? We're all familiar with it. The state passes a law and then doesn't fund it. And then it becomes the county's responsibility to figure out how to fund it and how to move the programs forward. So one of the helpful, or one next step that either the subcommittee or the task force as a whole could do is to start put some definition to this type of program and how it would work locally and what the funding requirements would be. And that could help both from, the county making decisions from a budget standpoint, working with the cities for scenarios as that works through, or to build off of what Dan was talking about, go back to Olympia or go to other places and say, listen, here's the financial implications of this program. We think it's a great program. Here's where it doesn't move forward because the funding is not in place. So that next step of kind of program development, acknowledging who in our community may be a service provider and understanding the full scope and budget costs for a certain amount of people would be a super helpful piece of information to maybe take the next step in implementing something like this.
So I just wanted to add that there are no limitations within the statute regarding what type of treatment provider can do this work. So, it could be anyone. And at least as far as, and that's what I've seen in practice. you know, I understand that we have people who are not able to access a lot of treatment. I know that treatment's short here in our community. I just wanted to say that the person in my case, he was able to find treatment, and that wasn't his issue as much as it was having, I guess, the proper evaluation.
And that person may not have been indigent if they had private counsel. I don't know.
Right. He had, that's exactly right. He had family money. I mean, this man was not wealthy, but he had parents, and his parents had money that were able to help him get through the system.
The last thing I'll just ask is, do we know of any other county that's accomplishing this type of program?
I'm just hearing struggles statewide in the meetings that I attend with other defense attorneys. I mean, no one has money for this. And honestly, I think Snohomish County maybe had one, and they sent the person to Whatcom to get treatment. So we are more flush than the surrounding communities, and our resources are going to get tapped for their needs as well, I have a feeling.
Thank you so much, Maya and Eric and Tyler and Jackie and everybody that chimed in on this. I think it's something that we need to research further for funding issues and treatment providers. So I think we should keep this on the radar. Is there any other questions from anybody else on this subject? Seeing no hands, I know we are running short on time because it is now 12:57 and we're supposed to be done at 1, but we also have Perry. So Perry, do we want to table your presentation to the next meeting, or is this something that you can wrap up shortly?
I'm certainly willing to talk about this more, Raylene, at another session, but I can, very briefly share that this is this topic is in relation to the co-response model that is imminent in being implemented in Whatcom County in collaboration with the Sheriff's Office. Just to let folks know, and again, I'll provide a more detailed information, but the Health Department did respond to a response for proposal and was the successful bidder of that RFP. And so we have received indication for funding and are working with the Sheriff's Office at this point in time to implement this program over the next few months. So there's a number of steps, obviously, in terms of standing up and implementation, but we're really excited about the fact that the funding is available through the Behavioral Health Administrative Services Organization and the close work that the Sheriff's Office is also sharing with us in order to stand this up. So I'll stop there just in the interest of time. And again, I'm available at our next meeting. More than happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Perry, and I'm sorry for cutting you short today. That wasn't the intention, but sometimes we want to make sure we get adequate time for the ones that are set before. So I think we will definitely put you on the next agenda just so we can touch base on what's going on and other options as needed. And is there any other business that we need to tend to? Okay, is there public comment? Jill, can you help us out?
Yes, thank you. It doesn't look like we have any in-person attendees in our conference room. We do have 2 attendees joining us virtually. If you'd like to speak to the committees, please virtually raise your hand now. No hands are raised.
In interest in time, I'd like to thank everybody that participated in today's meeting and adjourn. Thank you.